Welcome back to Building Effective News and Information Websites, the jQuery and WordPress edition. And as we wrap up our lessons this week on WordPress, I want to make sure we take a moment to connect the dots and talk about how we can bring the topic from week one, jQuery, back into the mix. And so this lesson is all about installing jQuery and setting up a custom jQuery script in the context of a WordPress site. We already know how to install jQuery and get a script running if we're working with plain old HTML files in a static kind of environment. But what happens when we bring WordPress into the mix? How do we pull it off then? Well, the bad news is it is a little more involved. The good news is it's not terribly complicated, and once we get it set up initially, we're good to go and we're ready to use it anywhere and anyhow in our site. And that means that we get access to the full range of jQuery plugins that we may want to incorporate into our site, and that is a very exciting prospect. So the trick with bringing jQuery into the mix onto a WordPress site is with many things WordPress related. There are good ways and right ways to do it, and there are shortcuts we can take that aren't so good for us in the long haul. The shortcut with jQuery involves hard coding a reference to the jQuery library, including that script tag, pointing to the library, say the library off on the Google website, and then also pointing to our own script, pasting those lines somewhere into the appropriate template file in WordPress. Now, technically that would work as long as our script tags were set up properly, and we may not run into any trouble. The problem is WordPress is a highly complex environment. There are a lot of interrelations in WordPress, especially as we begin pulling in additional WordPress plugins. Some of the plugins that we pull into WordPress will themselves be using jQuery, or they may be using other JavaScript libraries. And if we really want to use that WordPress plugin, but it's already using jQuery or it's using something else, there's a chance that we could end up with some conflict between our jQuery and our custom script and whatever this other plugin is trying to do with its usage of JavaScript. And so, although it takes a little more time to set up, the procedure we're going to show you today to get jQuery installed in WordPress is the way to go about this to ensure that we don't have conflicts, unintended consequences down the road when we begin to build out our site, incorporate additional WordPress plugins, and move ourselves more and more toward a fairly complex presentation of everything. Okay, having said all of that, let's roll up our sleeves and get down to business here. The first thing that we want to establish is when we install jQuery on a WordPress site, what we're really doing is incorporating it into the theme. So if we install jQuery on the current theme and we end up switching to a different theme, we're going to need to reinstall jQuery onto that second theme. Now it turns out when we reinstall it, we're really just copying and pasting the code we write this first time, making a few small modifications to it, and then getting it set up with that second theme. But it is important to know that jQuery is going to be installed and running at the theme level. So it really is helpful if we can settle on the theme we want to use first. It's fine if we want to develop that theme as we go, but it's good to know that that's the theme we're going to go with. And so part of the development of the theme is adding jQuery into the mix. Now, we do this in the same spot that we make a number of other theme modifications, extensions, enhancements, and that is inside of the theme functions.php file. Now this is where functionality and design and look and feel begin to kind of meld and blend together. And the functions.php file controls a lot about how a theme is actually going to work inside of WordPress. One of the things we can control is what kind of scripts, JavaScripts, get loaded into the theme, including jQuery and including any custom JS files that we want to add in even after that. Okay, so let's get down to business here. We're going to go into the appearance section of WordPress here, and we're going to go over to the editor. What we're going to do is edit the current theme. So I'm deciding right now that I want to add jQuery to the 2012 theme here inside of WordPress. Very next thing I want to do is move into my functions.php file, that theme functions file. So we'll click on that file name here in the right panel and scroll on down to the bottom of the file, get ourselves set up here to add in some code, and this is PHP code that is going to allow us to access the jQuery library. Now, one thing you may be wondering at this stage is what library exactly are we going to be pulling in? Are we going to go and download a copy of jQuery and add that to our website? Are we going to simply point to the open library on the Google Codes repository and use that one? Well, the answer is none of the above. What we want to do is use the version of jQuery that comes bundled with WordPress. That's right, WordPress already comes with jQuery. The trick is it's not turned on by default, and so that's what we're really doing at this phase. So the version that WordPress is going to ship with is probably going to be a few versions out of date than what you could get off the jQuery website. I think, for example, that what we've downloaded here with WordPress 3.5.2 has jQuery 1.8.2 or maybe even 1.7 something, and we know that we're already up to 1.10, so we're a few versions out of date. But that shouldn't be a showstopper because jQuery is a mature library. The changes we see from one revision to the next now tend to be minor, and almost every plugin is going to be compatible going back several versions in jQuery. The reason we want to use the version that's bundled with WordPress versus going off and pointing to the latest and greatest one on Google, for example, gets back to this idea of setting up a WordPress site that's going to be compatible with the widest range of WordPress plugins, including all the functionality they bring to bear, the widest range of WordPress themes. We want to make sure what we're doing is not going to break our site now or down the road. And one thing that can come up when we're working with a content management system is a kind of nefarious situation where we do something early on that we don't think is going to have any bad ramifications. And it's kind of like this ticking time bomb inside our site. And months or even years later, the problem can reveal itself. And often by then, it's become so embedded on our site that it can be very difficult to root out. So that's why we go to fairly great lengths to make sure that we're doing things in such a way that we're not going to break other parts of our site. And we do have to make some compromises in that process, and that includes not being able to use the very latest version of the jQuery library. Okay, so WordPress comes with jQuery, but jQuery isn't loaded by default. So what we have to do here in our functions.php file is load jQuery. And we have to do that using the particular tools that WordPress provides us. In addition to loading the jQuery file, what we also want to do is load a custom.js file, a custom script file. Why is that? Because as we've seen, loading the jQuery library by itself does nothing for us. We have to, in addition to that, load at least one more JS file, which is going to house our custom code. And chances are we're loading additional files beyond that as we have certain plugins that we want to use. Okay, so we're going to load the jQuery library and we're going to load our custom script. But there's a little bit of a twist here. The way we actually do this in WordPress is by jumping ahead and loading our custom script, and then telling WordPress that our script is dependent upon, that it's reliant on the jQuery library. By doing things that way, we get our script loaded, but we also tell WordPress to make sure to load the jQuery library first. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. Let's come into our functions file and we'll get to work here. Now, the code that I'm typing is included at the bottom of this course page, so you don't have to take notes or pull it out of the video here. You can simply copy and paste from the course page. And we're going to go through the process here so you understand what the code means and how you might modify it for your own purposes. So we're going to use two different special WordPress functions to pull all of this off. The first one is a function to register scripts on the site. The second function is one to on-queue scripts on the site. So registering the script makes it available to the theme. On-queuing the script actually prints out the script into our theme and onto our web pages. So it's a two-step process. It maybe sounds a little more complicated than it needs to be, but it's all necessary to create something that's going to be compatible with as much other stuff we throw at it as possible. So first we register our script. So we're going to begin with our function here. And the very next thing we type is going to be the name of the current theme that we're working with. We begin with the theme name. Happens to be 2012. So we'll type that in, and then an underscore. And then we're going to use the phrase register script. Okay, open and closing parenthesis, space, and an open curly brace. And we move forward with our function underneath that. Now, what we're going to do in this function is include one additional component, which is the method that's actually going to register the script. So this is a special WordPress method. Even though we're programming PHP here, what we're typing is specific to WordPress, and it wouldn't work outside of the WordPress CMS. So the method we want to invoke here is WP register script. Now I'm going to include an open parenthesis, but not a closing parenthesis, because I have several different values here that I want to provide inside of the parentheses, and it's a little easier to see them if we write them out one line at a time. Okay, so the first value that we provide is a tag or a handle or a slug for the script that we want to load. And remember, this is our custom script file now that we're referencing. So this is an arbitrary value. We're going to use it again in just a little bit in our script. So we want to be, as usual, short and also descriptive. I'm going to call this custom-js. You can use a different name if you want. As long as you're short and descriptive, you should be all set. Now that's the first value that we're passing inside the parentheses, but there are more. And oftentimes when we have a list of items that we're providing in code, we use commas to separate the items in the list. That's what's going to happen here. So we have a comma, and now we add in the next item, which is going to be the location of the script that we want to add. Now, because we are associating this script with this particular theme, physically we want to store the script inside of this theme folder on our site. And in fact, we want to store it inside of a subfolder, which is already provided for us, which is JS. So the theme is giving us a JS folder already, and that's exactly the right spot to stick a JS file. Okay, so I'm going to need to include a little extra information at the beginning of the path because I'm inside several levels here of my website. So we're inside of the E directory on the site, and then we're inside of the C Frechette directory. Come at this one more time here. We want to go to WP content. Whoops, my mistake. We can actually start right with WP content. Scratch that first part. Start with WP content and also start with that opening leading slash there, /. We're going to go inside the themes directory, and then we're going to go inside that JavaScript directory. And so that is going to take us to the end of that line. We'll put in a single apostrophe to close that out and a comma. Next piece of information that we want to provide is a list of all of the other scripts that this file is dependent on. And we're going to do that by using a special programming structure known as an array. It just happens to be the way that this kind of information has to be passed to this register script method. So we type in the word array, open parenthesis, and we're going to use a keyword value here that WordPress knows about, and it happens to be the word jQuery. We put it inside of single quotes, jQuery, close out the array with a closing parenthesis, and then another comma to take us to the next line. So this line here, array, that should actually be jQuery, pardon me, array jQuery, is telling us that jQuery, the library, has to load first, and then this script can load. In other words, this script is dependent upon the jQuery library. Final thing we're going to add is simply the word true. We're not going to put it in quotes. We're going to just type out true. It's a Boolean value. It can be either true or false. And in the context of this register script method, what it means is, if it's true, we want to load our script at the bottom of the page. Otherwise, it's going to load at the top of the page. Now, the difference is, in most cases, minimal. It's a best practice to load these custom scripts, though, at the bottom of our pages, and so we just go ahead and set that as true as a standard practice. So we're done. I'll come down one more line, close out our function here. This is our method, actually, our WP register script method. Now I also have to add a semicolon to the end of that line. Just like in JavaScript, we use semicolons almost like periods in English. And then I come down, and now I can close out the function, and I do that using the curly brace there. Okay, so to recap, we have this function. Inside the function, we're invoking a special WordPress method called WP register script. We're using that to identify this custom script that we want to load onto our site. We're giving it a tag. We're telling WordPress where the script's going to live. And we're also specifying what, if any, dependencies the script has. In this case, the dependency is jQuery, the library. Now, before we wrap this up, I'm realizing there's one piece that I forgot to add, and it is an important one. We want to come in here and make sure we also specify the file name, the full location, not just the path, but also the file name. So we'll call it custom.js. We can call it whatever we want. We've got to make sure that this path name here matches the file that we're going to put on the server. Okay, with that part set, we're ready to do part 2 of our configuration here in the functions file. And again, that's the onQueue script part of all this. So we've registered the script, now we onQueue it, and that's what's going to print it out on our site. So again, we have a function. Again, we begin with our theme name, 2012. This time we're going to say onQueue script. open and close parenthesis, open and close curly brace here, and everything else is going to go inside of this function. I'm actually going to make this plural up here as well, make sure we're matching what we're doing down below in the code exactly. So, and by the way, these are arbitrary function names that we're using. What's going to matter is when we add the final part to all this, that these function names match up with the final part. But otherwise, we can use any values that we see fit for these. Let's see here. Let me make sure I'm spelling this correctly. I think I have an error there. Okay, that looks a little bit better. Okay, so inside of my onQScripts function, once again, I'm going to invoke a special WordPress method. And this time I'm going to add another bit of code, which is going to check and see if the person logged in is an admin user. If they're an admin user, we're not actually going to load the script. Why? Because once again, if we do that, conflicts can arise. We only want to load the script for people that are not logged in as administrators on our site. So in order to make that check, we're going to come in here and use an if statement. Now, if is a very common programming construct. It's a way that we can evaluate a condition and only execute code if the condition turns out to be true. So what we're going to evaluate in this case is whether or not the person logged in is an admin, an administrative user. WordPress gives us another method that we can use to check, and that method is _admin. Now, that method is always going to return the word true if the person is an administrative user. So if I put that in, is admin, and finish my conditional statement like this, what's really happening here is we're saying if the person is an administrator, if that evaluates to be true, then execute the code below. Well, that's the opposite of what we want to do. What we want to say is if the person is not an administrator, then execute the code below. So the way we do that is, again, by using a very standard programming construct, which is to negate the value or reverse the value that we're checking by using an exclamation mark at the beginning. And that means if it's not true. So if the person is not an administrator, is not an admin user, then we're going to move forward with the code listed below. So again, without the exclamation mark, we're saying, is it true? With it, we're saying, is it false? We want it to be false. In other words, we don't want the person to be an admin user on the site. Okay, with that set, we're ready to write our final piece here, and then we'll wrap things up with some actions. We'll get to that in just a second. Okay, so to finish this part off, what we're going to do is reference the script that we registered earlier. So we're going to do that by, again, invoking a built-in method. It's WP _ onQ _ script. And then inside of the parentheses, we're going to use open and closing quotes, and we're going to use the same tag that we did up above when we first registered our script. This is where it's arbitrary, but we want to make sure it maps up. So custom-js is used up here. We're going to use it down here as well. Okay, we're getting close, I promise. So we've registered a script. We've basically identified it and set up some information about it, including what it requires and where it lives on the server. And then we've added the script to our website. So we're in pretty good shape, except for one thing. When we write functions, whether it's in JavaScript or in this case PHP, the code inside those functions will never execute unless the function is actually called. So what we need to do is call both of these functions. And there's a way to call functions in general. And then there's a way that WordPress provides us. Once again, we want to make sure we're doing things the WordPress way. And so we're going to follow WordPress nomenclature here. Now, the first function I'm going to call is going to be the first one here I set up, the 2012 register scripts function. So let me come back up here, and right after this function, I'm going to add a method to invoke that function, to call that function. Basically, what I'm saying is we want to execute the function. Now, the reason we have to do this using the special method that WordPress provides us is WordPress wants to know exactly when we should invoke the method, when we should make the function actually run. And so using WordPress's protocol, we have a lot of control over when various scripts in our theme file, in our theme function file, actually end up getting executed. Okay, so we're going to say add action. That's the special WordPress method that we're using here. This is going to be an init action, the kind of action that we're executing. And again, that tells WordPress when and how to execute it. And then we're going to reference this name that we set up above here. And so I'm just going to copy it and paste it down below so I don't introduce a typo into the mix here. Close it out with a parenthesis and a semicolon at the end. So what we're saying here is when the script initializes, that's the init part, we want to run the register scripts function, which I have defined up above here. Okay, final piece we need to add is another add action. Now this is a different kind of action because this time we're trying to actually print the script out onto the screen. And to do that, we're going to say WP underscore print underscore scripts. It's another special action that WordPress has defined for us. And the question now is, okay, what scripts do we want to print? And that's where we send along the information about the second function here. Close this out and put a semicolon on it. So here's the actual sequence of events. WordPress is going to come to this line and it's going to say, oh, okay, you want me to run this function when this functions.php file initializes. Great, I'll go ahead and do that. And so WordPress registers the script that we've defined here when this function runs. Then we're saying we want to print some scripts out onto the screen. And the scripts that we want to print out are defined inside of this function, 2012 onQueueScripts. So WordPress says, okay, great, I'll run that function. It runs the function, makes sure the user is not an admin, and then onQueues the script. And this is where the script is actually printed out onto the page. And we're referencing the script by the tag that we set up earlier. And that way, we're getting all the extra information when we register the script, including the fact, because it's true at the bottom, that this script should go into the bottom of the page, including the fact that we're requiring the jQuery library, and so on. So this all feels a little tedious, I know, and it's fairly technical. We're getting into some real legitimate programming here. We have conditional statements and functions. It's enough to really make your head hurt. But there is a certain logic underpinning all of this. And the good news is we don't have to really write all this from scratch every time we do this. This is why we save code for later. And we have little notepad files where we store scripts that we use time and time again. This is why we put the script down below here on this course page. So you can copy and paste it and then modify it as you see fit. So in our case, what might you modify? Well, you might have a different file name for your JS file, something different than custom.js. You might be using a different theme, something other than 2012, so you'd update this value here, you'd update 2012 here, and everywhere else that it appears. You might not require the jQuery library, and so you'd leave this array empty, and so on and so forth. But for now, I think we have everything set up just the way we want. So I'm going to go ahead and save this file here by updating it. File has been edited successfully. The site is still running, so I haven't managed to crash it in the process of making all those edits. We're just about done. There is one final thing we need to do, and that is to actually get a custom.js file and move it on up to the server. So what I'd like to do is just do a very simple JS file to have a kind of proof of concept here that this is working. And then next week we're going to come back to all this, flesh out those custom files, and actually get some real life, honest to goodness jQuery plugins working on our WordPress sites. Okay, so here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to come over to my Mac Vim text editor here, and I'm going to create a very simple file. In fact, all I'm going to do is add a comment to this file using a double slash. Now remember, comments in any kind of programming language are special instructions to programmers explaining what the files are doing, what the scripts are for, what the code is all about. It gets ignored by the programming language itself, and it's simply there to document what's happening. So in this case, we can use it just to make sure that our file is getting loaded up. So we'll say this is a test of WordPress plus jQuery. All right. And then we're going to save the file. Let me just drop it onto my desktop. Custom.js, very important that I use that name since that's what I specified in my functions.php file. We'll come over here to FileZilla, and I'm already inside of my WP content folder. I'm inside my themes directory. I want to hop into 2012. That'll take a second to load. There's that JS folder. Again, I got that when my theme was installed, when WordPress was installed for that matter. I didn't have to add it. I'm going to come inside of that folder, and I want to put my custom.js file inside of here. So let me come over to my desktop. I'll grab the file, and I'll put it there in the folder. Okay, now we come over to WordPress. Except that I'm still logged into WordPress, so this is not going to work. Remember, I have to be a non-admin user to get this to work. I'm logged in as an admin user right now. So to fix that, let me log on out of the site. And then I'm going to take off the login portion here to come back to the home page and see if that loads up. Okay, I don't see anything loading just yet, and that's a very good sign that I messed something up in my functions.php file, which is unfortunate, but a good thing to demonstrate here because it does happen, and it's always a good idea. I didn't do it this time, but before we start editing that function file, to go in and to save a backup of it, so we have a way to get back just in case things really go awry. And actually, as you can see, even now, I'm having no luck at all here loading my site. So I've really got myself in a pickle. But fortunately, there is a way to work around this. Let me show you what we can do. I'm going to come over to FileZilla. And I know the file that's causing trouble is my functions.php file because that's the only one that I was working on. It's inside of my theme here. And let me sort by file name so I can find it. There it is, functions.php. So what I'm going to do is put a little extension on this file here. This could be anything. I just want to rename it. We'll say functions.new.php. Then what I'm going to do is come back to my desktop and grab the original functions file for the 2012 theme. We'll come into the theme folder here and grab that functions file, and then I'm going to drag it onto my site. Okay, with that replaced, I should be able to load my site again. Let's see if that happens. Okay, it does, asking me to log in again. Let's do that. Okay, so now I need to figure out what went wrong with that script that I set up. So let's come back into our editor here. Okay, so here's our original functions file, theme functions, and we also have access to that new file that we set up here. Here it is. It's not actually part of WordPress right now because it has this .new portion to the name, but we can still access it from WordPress, which is really handy as we come in here and figure out where things went astray. So let me copy the code, and we'll get ready to move it into our real functions file here. Go ahead and paste it into place here. Okay, let's pull that up. Now I have a note on the side here of how this should be set up. Let's do a quick comparison and see where things went astray. So we have our function file, and that looks good. Custom.js. Okay, so I see one thing I messed up here is I didn't have my theme name as part of my path to the file. Now that's a big problem. The true path here should be themes/2012 and then /js/custom.js. So that's a big goof up on my part. Now we can prove that's the right way to do it by going into FileZilla here and double checking our path, and there it is, WP content themes 2012, and then from there we get into JS, and from there we have our custom.js file. So that's at least one thing that I messed up in coding that. Let's take a look here and see what else might have gone wrong. Oh, here's another thing. I forgot an important line, and you probably already noticed this. After I specify which libraries are required, I need to provide a version number for my script. Now, this is an arbitrary way of telling WordPress what revision we're working on off of our script. Most of the time, we just set this to 1.0.0, and we're in good shape. We can update that over time as our underlying script changes, but that's a pretty formal thing to do, and for most projects, it's fine to just leave that as 100. Now, chances are that's actually what was causing my site to basically crash and stop loading, because that's a relatively more serious issue than goofing up on the path to the JS file. If I just goofed up on the path, it wouldn't load the content, but it probably wouldn't crash the site. If I don't give this WP register script method all the values it's expecting, that can definitely cause some problems. And of course, it's also possible there's something else not quite right here in the code. So let's take a spin through, double check. All right, that looks good. If is admin, that looks good. You'll notice I don't have a space here before my opening curly brace. That's optional. I can have it or not going to affect things one way or the other. There's my WQ on Q script. And sure enough, my subpar spelling has come back to haunt me here. So we got to get this fixed up. So that should be ENQUEUE. Would be helpful if I got that right in every case. So this maybe is truly what was crashing my site. I wouldn't be surprised at all. That's why it's always good to double check these things. Okay, and otherwise I think we are in pretty good shape here. So let me close that down. We'll update the file. Okay, updated successfully. That's a good sign. Let's see if I can actually log out this time. Okay, so the site hasn't crashed this time. That's a promising thing. Let's come out to our home page. Okay, the site is still loading, also a good thing. But the real question is, have we succeeded in loading jQuery onto the site? And have we loaded our custom.js file? To test that, I'm going to take a look at the back end here. We'll do the page source. And let's open things up a bit here and see if we can find jQuery. Let's do a search for it. Okay, there's jQuery. That's a very good sign. If I click on that link, there it is. The jQuery library 183 is what we're working with right now. Good enough for our purposes. Now, how about that custom.js file? Let's do a search for that. Custom.js, and here we go. Custom.js, there's the version number tacked on to the end of the file. And if I click on that file, here it is. This is a test of WordPress and jQuery. Well, I don't know about you, but I am ready for a break after all of that. It's quite a bit of work to get jQuery installed in WordPress, especially relative to the procedure we went over last week. But this is part of the price we pay when we work inside of a content management system. Many things are made faster and easier in a CMS, and certain things are made more difficult. And it is a trade-off. It is a cost of admission that we have to pay in order to tap into all of the great things that we can get to down the road. And that includes WordPress plugins, jQuery plugins, other theme files, and lots of other stuff. So we could have taken some shortcuts here and used a different method to get those scripts in play, something much more like what we did last week, but that could definitely cause problems for us down the road. What we're doing now is a rock-solid way to use jQuery, and there's just one final but important note that I need to make about all this. And again, it gets back to this idea of using jQuery in a very complex environment now, where we could have other JavaScript libraries loading, we could have a lot of other plugins in play, and we want to be very careful that this jQuery that we're working with here and our custom scripts doesn't cause conflicts in other places. So what we have to reconcile is the version of jQuery that we're loading here that comes bundled with WordPress is known as the no conflict version of jQuery. Now, what that means is really quite simple. We can't use the $sign unless we make a modification to our script. And it's a pretty simple modification, but it's a very important one to make. And it's something that we're going to get into next week. I just want to tease you about it now. Next week we'll show you exactly what we need to do. Just remember, there's a little tweak we're going to make. It's actually just one character difference, but very important to make sure that the jQuery that we write here is going to end up being functional. Okay, so stay tuned for that next week. Meanwhile, enjoy your adventures in WordPress. Good luck on the assignments this week, and of course, stay in touch via the discussion forums and email, and I hope to see you as much as possible in our live sessions. Take care. Thanks for your patience. Thanks for sticking in there with me here right up till the end. Take care.